This content is for educational and documentary purposes only. In the early hours of June 10th, 1912, a shadow fell over the small, industrious town of Villisca, Iowa. A shadow so deep, so absolute, that would never truly lift. Villisca was a place of white picket fences, Sunday church bells, and the rhythmic clatter of the Burlington and Quincy Railroad. It was a town where everyone knew their neighbor, and doors were rarely locked against the night. But on this particular Monday morning, the summer heat felt heavy, stifling, and thick with an unspoken dread. The sun rose over the home of Josiah Moore, a successful business designed to fail. Chapter 1. The Sharp Family. Glenna Sue Sharp, known to her friends as Sue, was 36 years old when she decided to leave Connecticut. She was a mother of 5, a woman seeking refuge from a troubled marriage and the chaos of the East Coast. In late 1980, she packed her belongings and her children into their car and headed west, eventually settling in the small, mountain community of Keddie. To Sue, Keddie offered safety. It was a place where neighbors knew each other, where children could play in the woods, and where the air was clean and cold. They rented Cabin 28, a modest wooden structure tucked away in the trees. Life was simple, money was tight, but they were making it work. Her eldest son, John, was 15. Her daughters, Sheila and Tina, were 14 and 12. The younger boys, Rick and Greg, were 7-5. On the surface, the Sharps were the picture of a family rebuilding. But the mountains can be isolating, and in the spring of 1981, that isolation would become a trap. Chapter 2. The night of April 11th. The Saturday of April 11th began like any other spring day in the mountains. John Sharp and his best friend, 17-year-old Dana Wingate, had spent the day in the nearby town of Quincy, hitchhiking and looking for adventure. Sheila was staying overnight with friends in a neighboring cabin. Inside Cabin 28, Sue remained with her younger children. Tina was home, as were Rick and Greg, and a young friend of theirs, Justin Smart, who was sleeping over. As the sun dipped below the granite peaks, the temperature dropped. The forest grew silent. Neighbors later reported seeing lights in the cabin late into the evening. Around 10 p.m., John and Dana returned to Keddie, their silhouettes disappearing into the shadows of Cabin 28. What happened next remains a subject of intense forensic debate. Somewhere between midnight and the early hours of Sunday morning, the peace of the woods was shattered. There were no screams reported by the neighbors. No sounds of a struggle reached the ears of those in the nearby cabins. Yet, inside those wooden walls, a level of violence was being unleashed that defied comprehension. Chapter 3. The Discovery. Sunday morning, April 12th, 7 a.m. Sheila Sharp walked back to her family's cabin, expecting a quiet morning. She stepped through the front door and was instantly met with a scene that would haunt her for the rest of her life. The living room was a sea of red. In the center of the room lay 3 bodies. Her mother, Sue, her brother, John, and his friend, Dana. They were bound with medical tape and electrical wire. They had been beaten with hammers and stabbed repeatedly. The sheer amount of blood suggested a frenzied, prolonged attack. Sheila, in a state of shock, ran back to the neighbor's cabin, screaming. The police were called, but in the remote reaches of Plumas County, response times were slow. When the first deputies arrived, they found a surreal scene. While 3 people lay dead in the living room, the 3 youngest boys, Rick, Greg, and Justin, were found alive and physically unharmed in the back bedroom. They had slept through the entire massacre, or so they claimed. But as the officers began to count the occupants, a chilling realization set in. 12-year-old Tina Sharp was missing. Chapter 4. The Crime Scene Analysis. The investigation into Cabin 28 was plagued with errors from the very first hour. The scene was not properly secured. Dozens of people walked through the blood-spattered living room before forensic teams could arrive. However, the physical evidence that remained told a story of extreme brutality. 2 different hammers had been used, 1 claw hammer and 1 smaller hammer. A steak knife from the kitchen had been used with such force that the blade had bent at a 90-degree angle. Sue Sharp had been partially covered with a blanket. Her injuries were horrific. Her throat had been cut, and she had been bludgeoned. John and Dana had been bound together, their ankles and wrists tied with clinical precision. The perpetrators had spent a significant amount of time in the cabin. This wasn't a quick in-and-out robbery. This was personal. This was an execution. Investigators found no signs of forced entry. This suggested that either the victims knew their attackers or the front door had been left unlocked, a common practice in the safe mountain town of Keddie. Chapter 5. The Vanishing of Tina Sharp. The disappearance of Tina Sharp turned a murder investigation into a desperate search and rescue. Blood was found on the doorframe of Tina's bedroom, suggesting she had been taken by force. For months, the woods around Keddie were combed by hundreds of volunteers and law enforcement officers. Divers searched the nearby Spanish Creek. Helicopters flew overhead. There was nothing. No clothing, no signs of struggle in the forest, no Tina. The FBI was called in, but the trail had gone cold almost immediately. Theories began to circulate. Was Tina the primary target? Had she witnessed the murders and been taken to keep her silent? Or was her abduction a secondary thought in a night of chaotic violence? The absence of her body cast a long, dark shadow over the investigation. Without Tina, the story of Cabin 28 felt incomplete, a puzzle with its most vital piece missing. Chapter 6. The Neighbors and the Suspects. In a small community like Keddie, everyone is a suspect. But two names rose to the top of the list almost immediately. Marty Smart and John Beau Babade. Marty Smart lived in Cabin 26, just steps away from the Sharps. He was the stepfather of Justin Smart, one of the boys who survived the night in the back room. Marty had a history of violence and a volatile temper. His friend, Beau Babade, was a guest in his home, a man with a criminal record and alleged ties to organized crime in Chicago. On the night of the murders, Marty, Beau, and Marty's wife, Marilyn, had gone to the local bar, the Backdoor Social Club. Marty had complained to the bartender about the music being too loud. Later that night, Marty claimed he had lost a hammer that matched the description of one of the murder weapons. Despite these red flags, Marty and Beau were never arrested. They were interviewed, their stories were checked, and they were allowed to leave town shortly after the murders. Marty even moved to another state, leaving behind a trail of suspicious letters that would not be discovered for years. Chapter 7. The 1984 Discovery. 3 years passed. The Keddie case had faded from the headlines, though the fear remained in the hearts of the locals. In April 1984, exactly 3 years after the massacre, a bottle collector was walking through the woods in Butte County, about 30 miles away from Keddie. There, in a remote area known as Camp 18, he found a human skull. Forensic testing confirmed the worst fears of the Sharp family. It was Tina. Alongside her remains, investigators found a blue nylon jacket, a pair of Levi's jeans with a missing back pocket, and an empty medical tape dispenser. The medical tape dispenser was a haunting echo of the tape used to bind the victims in Cabin 28. The discovery of Tina's remains changed the geography of the crime. The killers hadn't just fled into the night. They had transported a 12-year-old girl 30 miles across rugged terrain to a location they clearly knew well. Yet, even with this new evidence, the investigation stalled. Lead investigators seemed more interested in closing the book than in following the trail of the tape. Chapter 8. The Lost Clues. As the decades rolled by, the Keddie case became a textbook example of a botched investigation. Evidence went missing. Audio tapes of interviews were misplaced. Perhaps most shocking was the lost confession. Years after the murders, a letter from Marty Smart to his wife Marilyn was found. In it, he wrote, "I've paid the price of your love, and now I've bought it with 4 lives." Marilyn later admitted she found the letter, but didn't think it was important enough to turn over to the police at the time. Furthermore, a therapist in Reno, Nevada, came forward claiming that Marty Smart had confessed to the murders during a session. The therapist said he had alerted the Plumas County Sheriff's Office, but they had never followed up. Why would law enforcement ignore confession? Why would they let a prime suspect slip through their fingers? The rumors of corruption and a cover-up began to grow, suggesting that Marty Smart had connections to high-ranking officials that protected him from the law. Chapter 9. The Cold Case Revival. In 2013, the Keddie case was officially reopened. Special investigator Greg Hagwood, who was a teenager in the area when the murders happened, took the lead. He was joined by investigator Mike Gamberg. Together, they began to dig through the boxes of old evidence that had been gathering dust for 30 years. They found things that had been ignored for decades. In 2016, a claw hammer was discovered in a pond near Ketty, precisely where Marty Smart had once lived. It matched the description of the hammer Marty claimed to have lost on the night of the murders. They also discovered a tape recording of an anonymous tip from 1981 that had never been properly investigated. The tipster had identified the killers and the location of Tina's body years before it was found. The more Hagwood and Gamberg dug, the more they realized that the original investigation hadn't just been incompetent, it had been obstructed. Chapter 10: Theories of the Night. There are many theories about what truly happened inside Cabin 28. Some believe it was a drug deal gone wrong, involving John and Dana. Others believe it was an act of domestic vengeance, fueled by Marty Smart's obsession with Sue Sharp. A more chilling theory suggests that the murders were a ritualistic act, or perhaps a message sent to the community. But the most likely scenario is the simplest and most tragic. Marty Smart and Bo Bobade, fueled by alcohol and rage, entered the cabin to confront Sue. When John and Dana arrived home unexpectedly, the situation spiraled into a murderous frenzy. The precision of the bindings suggests a military or law enforcement background, something Bo Bobade was rumored to have. The survival of the three younger boys remains the biggest mystery. Did the killers spare them because they were innocent, or were the boys under some form of sedation that kept them from witnessing the horror? Chapter 11: The Legacy of Cabin 28. Cabin 28 was demolished in 2004. The wood was hauled away, and the foundation was covered with dirt. But you cannot bury a haunting. The town of Ketty never recovered. The resort closed, and the cabins fell into disrepair. For the survivors, like Sheila Sharp, the search for justice has been a lifelong journey. Marty Smart died in 2000. Bo Bobade died in 1988. Both men took their secrets to the grave, never having spent a day in prison for the events of April 11th. Yet, the case remains open. DNA technology continues to advance, and investigators Hagwood and Gamberg remain committed to finding a definitive answer. They believe there are still people alive today who know exactly what happened that night, people who have remained silent out of fear or loyalty. Chapter 12: The Silence Remains. As we look back at the Ketty Cabin murders, we are left with the image of a family destroyed in the dark of the mountains. We are left with the image of Tina Sharp, whose life was stolen and whose remains were left in the cold Sierra woods. The story of Cabin 28 is a reminder that evil can exist even in the most beautiful places. It is a reminder that justice is not always swift, and sometimes it is not served at all. But as long as the wind blows through the pines of Plumas County, the names of Sue, John, Dana, and Tina will not be forgotten. Their story remains a plea for the truth, a call for justice that has been echoing for over 40 years. Until the last secret is told, the silence of Ketty will never be truly peaceful. Thank you for listening to this account of the Ketty Cabin murders. If you have any information regarding this case, please contact the Plumas County Sheriff's Office. Stay safe in the shadows. Into script. The real killer was likely miles away, riding the rails to his next destination. The psychological profile of such a killer would be a man who felt powerless, seeking total control through the absolute destruction of a family unit. The act of covering the mirrors could be a way of depersonalizing the scene, allowing him to stay in the house longer without confronting the reality of what he had done. Or it could be a manifestation of a belief that he was an invisible agent of a higher power. Chapter 10: The Trials and Legal Failures. The legal proceedings following the Villisca murders were a mess of political grandstanding and personal vendettas. The feud between Detective Wilkerson and the Jones family dominated the headlines for years. Thousands of dollars were spent on investigations that led nowhere. The grand juries were often more interested in local gossip than forensic facts. The trial of Reverend Kelly was the closest the state ever came to a conviction, but the evidence was purely circumstantial. The confession was tainted by allegations of coercion, and the physical evidence was non-existent. By the 1920s, the trail had gone cold. The original investigators had retired or died. The house, once a site of unimaginable horror, was sold and passed through several owners. The town of Villisca tried to move on, but the memory of that June night was woven into the very fabric of the community. Every time a new axe murder was reported somewhere else in the country, the wounds of Villisca would be reopened. Justice was not just delayed, it was denied. Chapter 11. The House Today. Today, the Moore House still stands at 508 East 2nd Street. It has been restored to its 1912 appearance. No electricity, no running water, and with the curtains drawn tight. It is now a museum and a site for paranormal investigators. Visitors report hearing the sound of children's voices, seeing shadows move in the attic, and feeling a sudden, overwhelming sense of dread in the downstairs bedroom. Whether you believe in ghosts or not, the house remains a monument to a tragedy that has no resolution. It is a place where time seems to have stopped on June 10th, 1912. The unsolved nature of the crime is what keeps it alive in the public imagination. We want to know who. We want to know why. But as the decades turn into a century, the truth becomes harder to find. The witnesses are gone. The suspects are buried. Only the house remains, silent and watchful. Chapter 12. A Century of Silence. As we look back on the Villisca Axe Murders, we are faced with the limits of human justice. Sometimes, the darkest deeds are never brought to light. The killer, whoever he was, took his secrets to the grave. Was it the powerful senator protecting his interests? Was it the mad preacher following a divine command? Or was it a nameless shadow from the railway, a monster that thrived in the quiet of the American night? We may never know, but the story of the Moore family and the Stillinger girls serves as a reminder of the fragility of peace. In the small town of Villisca, the echoes of the axe still ring out, a haunting reminder that some mysteries are never meant to be solved. For now, we leave the house on 2nd Street to its shadows. Sleep well, and remember to lock your doors. For in the darkness, the past is never truly dead. It is just waiting for the right moment to return. This concludes our look into the Villisca Axe Murders. Thank you for listening to this ambient true crime documentary. If you found this case as haunting as we did, please subscribe for more deep dives into history's most chilling unsolved mysteries. Good night.